I want to begin with a very risky question for Baptists. Very risky question. I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to. Who here has ever seen a movie before? Raise your hand. Oh, you've seen a couple. Okay, I ask that because I have to confess, I too have seen a couple movies in my time. I watch them, though, for one reason, to become a better storyteller so you won't get bored during my sermons. So if you're upset at me for watching movies, don't blame me, it's for you. All right. With that in mind, one thing I've learned through watching movies is to keep a movie pacing well, good storytellers will use what are called plot devices. Plot devices keep the action going. Some plot devices are fantastic. Some, if they're used wrong, they're terrible. Like a good plot device would be throw a couple zombies in there. That will get the movie going well. That's a great plot device. But there's 3 plot devices that drive me absolutely crazy when they're in a movie and I can't take it. The first one is what I would call convenient misunderstanding. So when somebody in the movie hears somebody else, but they completely misunderstand what they said, and so the rest of the movie, they're operating on a misunderstanding. So in Shrek 2, Shrek goes up to the door, Fiona's talking to the donkey says, ogres are ugly, so he thinks she's talking about him, but she's talking about herself, thinking Shrek will never love me because I'm an ogre and I'm ugly. So the whole movie's all misunderstanding. Drives me crazy. Second kind of plot device that drives me crazy is what I hate it. Sometimes it can be used good, but man, it's sloppy writing, is a time machine. A time machine. Throw a time machine in there, and anybody who died earlier can come back again. Oh, I hate that. Drives me crazy. Third kind of plot device, and this is the worst one of all. It's terrible. It's amnesia. I can't take it. I can't take it. There's a movie my daughter was watching a couple years ago. It's called The Vow. Have you ever heard of The Vow? V-O-W? It's about this guy and this woman, Channing Tatum, such a good-looking guy, falls in love with Rachel McAdams, a beautiful lady, and they had a 5-year romance, and they get married, and they have a wonderful life together. And they're at a stop sign, and there's such good relationship, she unbuckles her seatbelt just to give him a kiss, right on the cheek. And right when she does, a truck slams into the car, and she goes flying through the windshield, and she completely loses her short-term memory. She wakes up in the hospital, she looks at her husband, and she says to him, "Who are you?" It's terrible. They have this deep, abiding love affair. She gets hit in the head, and she forgets her husband. It's a terrible story. So the whole movie, the rest of the movie, her parents who didn't like her husband are trying to bring her back home. Her old creepy boyfriend comes in, and really nothing ever gets figured out. Even at the end, they say hi to each other or whatever, but she still forgets. It's terrible, terrible storyline. I hate that plot. But I started thinking, you know what? I've heard this story before. I've heard this story before. And as a pastor, I have to tell you, to my shame, sometimes this is my story. And I would say for a large majority of us sitting in here, this is all of our story. God, the great lover, who gives us everything, loves us unconditionally, is often forgotten because we find other lovers, other idols, other things, and we forget Him. And this is called willful amnesia. I choose to forget. And so today, if we go to Deuteronomy 8, that's what it's all about, is willful amnesia. And the title for today is The Sin of Willful Amnesia. And I just want to read a few verses, but we're going to go through Deuteronomy 8. This is one of those chapters. Every time I read it, truthfully, it convicts me because it's so real and relevant. But look at Deuteronomy 8. We're going to start in verse 1. And in verse 1, Moses, again, he's got the people standing before the promised land, so he's going to talk about the law. Verse 1, be careful to follow every command I am giving you, so that you may live and increase and may enter and possess the land the Lord promised on oath, the vow, gave us a vow, gave his people a vow, an oath to your ancestors. Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years to humble and to test you, in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. Go to verse 7. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land. And remember, these guys have been in the wilderness, desert for 40 years. And listen where he's going to bring them. A land with brooks, streams, and deep springs gushing out into the valleys and hills. A land with wheat and barley, vines and fig trees, pomegranates, olive oil, and honey. A land where bread will not be scarce and you will lack nothing. A land where the rocks are iron and you can dig copper out of the hills. When you have eaten and are satisfied, praise the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God. Look at verse 19. If you ever forget the Lord your God and follow other gods and worship and bow down to them, I testify against you today that you will surely be destroyed. So, chapter 8, verse 1 starts off talking again about the law. We talked about the law last week, and we said, according to Moses, the law is good. It's how you receive blessing when you enter the land. If I obey the law, God will pour blessing, is the idea here. So follow it if you want life to go well. And then in verse 2, he introduces the topic for this passage. The topic is remembering. That's what it's all about. The word's remembering. Verse 11 says, do not forget. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God. Verse 14, he predicts if they're not careful, they will forget. Look at verse 14. Then your heart will become proud and you will forget the Lord your God. Then you have verse 18. He encouraged them to remember. Verse 18, remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability. And then again at verse 19, which we read, it warns about forgetting if you ever forget. So this is about forgetting and remembering, but you could say what this passage is all about is willful amnesia. If you talk about the word remember, it's a very interesting word, specifically how Moses uses it here. It's an interesting concept because I think most of us see remembering as a passive reflex response to life. It just kind of comes up upon you like an afternoon storm in the summer. It's just all of a sudden you think of something and then it goes away. But Moses tells us the act of remembering takes effort. Remembering takes effort. He's urging the people here in chapter 8 to do all you can to bring back to mind what he's done for you. So in this, he's going to tell them basically why you are who you are. That's what verse 1 and 2 is. He says, I'm the one who made a covenant with you. Verse 2, I'm the one who led you out of the wilderness these 40 years. You are who you are because of me. Then in verse 3 and 4, he talks about why you have what you have. Look at verse 3. He humbled you. This is an amazing thing. Listen closely what he did. He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had known. Remember, they were hungry and God was starving in the desert. He goes, don't worry, every morning you wake up, there's going to be wafers that taste like honey on the ground. You can gather as much as you want, but just for that day. So for 40 years, every day, they did nothing but gather something God produced. It's really kind of amazing. And then he keeps saying, verse 4, your clothes did not wear out, and your feet did not swell during these 40 years. They had the same clothes for 40 years, and they didn't need to stitch them. God took care of them. I want you to go to Exodus 23. Exodus is 3 books before Deuteronomy. And he talks a little bit more how God took care of them through the desert. Exodus 23. This is one of the neatest things. This was God's welfare program for his people Israel in the desert. Exodus 23, 21 to 28. Listen real close. It's really kind of amazing, actually. Verse 21 of Exodus 23. Pay attention to him. Who is this? This is the angel who goes before them. So there's this pillar of fire and this angel that would lead them. A lot of people think this angel was pre-incarnate Jesus. But look at verse 21. Pay attention to him and listen to what he says. Do not rebel against him. He will not forgive your rebellion since my, capital N, name is in him. That's why people think this is Jesus, pre-incarnate Christ. Verse 22. If you listen carefully to what he says and do all that I say, I will be an enemy to your enemies, and I will oppose those who oppose you. So that's the military for Israel is God. My angel, verse 23, will go ahead of you and bring you in the land of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, and Jebusites. I will wipe them out. It's pretty good military. Verse 24. Do not bow down before their gods or worship them or follow their practices. You must demolish them and break their sacred stones to pieces. Worship the Lord your God, and his blessing will be on your food and water. That's the health program right there. Food and water. They don't have to worry about it. I will take away sickness from among you. That's the healthcare system. Not a bad deal. Nobody will get sick for 40 years. I mean, it's amazing. Then you get 26, and none will miscarry. That's basically, there is your neonatal care right there. Nobody will miscarry or be barren. And I'll give you a full lifespan. Verse 27, I'll send my terror ahead of you and throw, that's propaganda. That's the propaganda wing. And to confusion every nation you encounter, I'll make all your enemies turn their back and run. I will send the hornet ahead of you. There's the insect repellent ahead of you. And drive out the Hivites, Canaanites, and Hivites, but I will not drive them out in a single year. So basically God's saying, if you just follow me, I'll do everything for you. It's not a bad deal. Remember what I did for you? It's pretty awesome. And if we go back to Deuteronomy, he talks about where they came from, verses 14 and 15. Where did they come from? Your heart will be proud, and you'll forget the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, and he led you through the wilderness. So he rescued out of sin, bondage, and desperation. So remember why you are who you are, remember why you have what you have, and remember where you've come from. Remembering takes effort. We all must discipline ourselves to bring to mind all the things God has done. When we do, we'll accomplish two amazing things. Remembering does two things. The first thing it encourages your faith. If he did it in the past, he'll take care of you tomorrow. If he answered prayer in amazing ways in the past, why are you worried about what's going to happen in the next year? One of the greatest Psalms to me is Psalm 13. Go to Psalm 13 real quick. Again, somebody said, it's actually Justin Westra, he's sitting right up here. He said, never apologize. You ask them to open up the Bible. All right? So the reason I'm having you go to passages is because Justin Westra gave me the right. So go to Psalm 13. This is so cool. This is an incredible psalm. And you felt this way. I know you felt this way. But here's what it says. It's David, and David had a tough life. And then verse 1, how long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day after day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Have you ever been there where it seems like every day gets worse? My life stinks. It's a normal human emotion. Verse 3, David says, look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes or I'm going to sleep in death. I can't do this anymore. My enemy will say, I've overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. And then you get to verse 5. Everything switches. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices. My heart rejoices. Weren't you just in despair? My heart rejoices in your salvation. Why? Verse 6, I will sing to the Lord, for he has been good to me. David remembers. We need to remember. Second thing why we need to remember is because what it does is it forms fitting obedience. So you have the whole book of Romans. The whole book of Romans is all about salvation. Chapter 3, you're a sinner. Chapter 4, salvation's by faith alone. Chapter 5, if you believe, you have grace. Chapter 6 is about now offer your bodies. Chapter 7 and 8 is all about there's no more condemnation. You get to chapter 11, Paul is singing his praises. Then he gets to chapter 12. Verse 1 says this, therefore, I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, in view of chapter 1 through 11, because I remember all of that he's done for me in salvation, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. And then he says, it's a reasonable act of worship. When I remember everything he did for me, it's reasonable to obey. So when I was in seminary in Chicago, I was dirt poor. I had nothing. And I didn't have a lot of food, so I worked a lot, and I had to go to class, and then I had to pay for my room, my dorm. And so I was going to this church, I was working at this church, and this really rich couple heard about my situation. They came up to me after service, and they said, hey, listen, we just got a job in Colorado, and we have to sell our house here in Chicago. It's a really nice house. At the time, this is back in around 1990, 91, it was worth $900,000. So it was a really nice house. And they said, hey, we gotta get a new job, and we're moving in 2 weeks to Colorado. We need somebody to live in our house so it looks lived in, because it's in Lincoln Park. It's in the city of Chicago, and we need somebody to live in it. And we'd like you to live in it and for free. So you're telling me I get to live in a house for free, $900,000 house? Yeah, and not only that, if you don't want to do it, this will hopefully entice you. We have about 6 months of food in our cupboards. It's all yours. I said, seriously? So I left the dorm, and $900,000 house. All I had to do is live in it. That's all I had to do. They had a master bedroom at the top. And they said, you can stay up there if you want. I'm like, nah, I just feel bad about it. I took this little side room, and I just would pray. It was incredible. And all I had to do was live in it, and then when I left, I had to clean it, so when the realtor came through, it was showable. I did it for 2 semesters. That next year, I took off to go back home for a year to pay off all my bills. They got another guy to live in there when I was gone. They gave him the same offer, but when he took over, he went up to the top room in the master's bedroom. He never cleaned it. He had all of his clothes strewn everywhere. When the realtor came in, they said it was trashed. So when I came back, this couple still didn't sell the house. They said, we threw that guy out on his ear. Will you come back? Some of us don't realize what we have been given. And we trash our bodies. We trash our mouth. We trash this world that God gave you freely. How do you think it makes him feel? How do you think it makes him feel when you no longer have gratitude, but you expect from the living God who sent his son to die for you? I want you to remember a few things, because I think as we remember, this should change us. But remembering takes effort. You have to think through this. I'm going to give you 7 things that you need to remember to stir up thoughts, to encourage you, but also to say, how am I living? It's just going to be a couple minutes. But you need to remember. Here they are. Number 1, we came into this world with nothing, and we leave with nothing. 1 Timothy 6:6. So why are so many of us holding so tightly to everything? Second, everything we have has been given to us. That's 1 Corinthians 4:7, including our talents, our intelligence, our looks, our life, our beating heart, our breathing lungs. You didn't do it. We should all be dead broke, and condemned, according to Romans 6:23. But for us, Jesus died broke and condemned so you could live. Number 4, we are loved in a way that is incomprehensible. Ephesians 3:18 says, I want to know the depth, the height, how much God's love. You are loved. Don't be depressed. We need to remember how much we're loved by the greatest being that ever lived. We have been chosen to be part of Christ's bride. We are to be a community. We are to do 2 things in this community, according to Philippians 2. Encourage one another and admonish one another, because sometimes admonishment is the best thing for us. But what's sad is when we admonish, we get mad at people, when in fact admonishment means somebody loves you. Because if you go to a bar, you're never admonished. Did you know that? Cheers, everybody knows your name. You know why they know your name? Because you're buying a round of drinks. Number 6, we live in the richest country in the history of humanity. Remember that. And I'd say number 7, all of us in here are probably better off than Helen Keller. That's the lowest common denominator. And she was full of joy. Don't forget how good you actually have it. Willful amnesia is sinful because when forgetting creeps in, we start to go back to our old nature and chase what our flesh wants, and we whine, moan, and complain. We then become, as Deuteronomy 8:17 says. Look at Deuteronomy 8:17. It says this, you may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hand has produced this wealth for me, but remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth. So when you forget, we enter a place that I call spiritual plagiarism. Plagiarism is when you take credit for somebody else, the product and work of somebody else. Spiritual plagiarism was when I look at my life and I say, aren't I something? Didn't God do it all? Look how Moses describes a spiritual plagiarist in Deuteronomy 32. This is scary. Deuteronomy 32:15. And this was really one of the biggest problems of Israel. Deuteronomy 32:15. If you want to really read it in the King James. It's hilarious in the King James. It really is. But here's what it says in the NIV. Deuteronomy 32:15. Jeshurun, which means Israel, my people Israel, that's Jeshurun, grew fat and they kicked. They filled with food, they became heavy and sleek. They abandoned the God who made them and rejected the rock of their Savior. When people they have a lot, they get fat and sleek and they forget. Oh, that's dangerous. In other words, they become spoiled. So when somebody's spoiled, in God's mind, when somebody's spoiled, what is better for them? Because what he's going to do is he's going to talk about 2 responses God has to a spoiled brat. What's better for a spoiled brat? Trials and testings and sufferings and difficulty and pain? Or triumph, victory, satisfaction, blessing, abundance? What's better for a spoiled brat in God's mind? Well, what you're going to see here is definitely trials are. Listen to verse 2 or 3 through 5. Verse 3 through 5. Because trials are meant to wake us up. Do you remember, like in the old movies, when usually you'd see this on the Three Stooges or something? Somebody get knocked in the head and they'd get amnesia. In the old movies, what would they do to bring them out of it? They'd knock them on the head again. It's like, somebody tried it. It doesn't work. You know, if you get hit in the head with a pan and you'd forget everything. In the old movies, they'd hit him again in the head with a pan. Oh, yeah. That doesn't work, but it does in the Bible. God will hit you again in the head with a pan. Look at I'm not kidding. Look at verse 3 and 5. 3 through 5. He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had known. Why? To teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Him being by my side is more important than just having my immediate needs met. If I have him and I have his word in my soul, I'm okay. Jesus used that. Your clothes, and then in 4 and 5, your clothes did not wear out, and your feet did not swell during these 40 years. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so the Lord your God disciplines you. Ouch. It's like Bob Wiley. Ow, ow, ow. That hurts. That hurts. It hurts because it's true. He's your dad. And your dad will often use trials to wake you back up. And honestly, personally speaking, I hate this truth. I hate it. But meditating on even this passage this week has helped me to recalibrate. Instead of being anxious, I'd say, God, what are you trying to teach me? Because watch how it works. Watch how it works. I'm walking. Everything's great. I think I'm great. Kind of proud, puffed up. And then I fall. Now I fall on the ground. I whine and cry, but when I open my eyes, where am I looking? That's the point. That's the whole point. God lets us fall so we'll look up. But then there's the lure of success when you're satisfied. Look at Deuteronomy 8:10-11. When you have eaten and are satisfied, praise the Lord your God. He's kind of warning for the good land he's given you. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe his commands, his laws, and his decrees that I'm giving you. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you build fine houses and settle down, and when your herds and flocks grow large and your silver and gold increase, and all you have is multiplied, then your heart will become proud and you will forget the Lord your God, which is probably the worst sin of all. So in a way you could say, blessing may be a very dangerous thing if you don't know how to remember. Proverbs 27:21 says this. The crucible for silver, that's that thing they put in the fire to burn out the dross. Furnace for gold, but people are tested by the praise they receive. How could blessing and praise be the real test? Because of forgetting. When I have everything I want, why do I even need God? When I'm successful, why do I need to pray? When I have more money than other people, a better job, a more prestigious career, aren't I a better person? In fact, if I get enough money, I'm probably even smarter than God. Look at Elon Musk. He's a non-religious person. George Soros is a avowed atheist. And Bill Gates, he just thinks religion gets in the way of efficiency. Because they're smarter. You know why they're smarter? Because they have a lot of money. When you have a lot of money, why do you need them? Go to Proverbs 30:7 and 8. Proverbs chapter 30:7 and 8. Proverbs is right after Psalms. So here's what the writer of Proverbs says. Two things I ask of you, Lord. Do not refuse me before I die. Keep falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. I don't know if I've ever prayed that prayer honestly. Honestly, I'd pray, God, load me up with money. Look at verse 9. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, who is the Lord? That's amnesia. Willful amnesia. Because they found a new lover called riches and money. You know the lyrics. I'll say the lyrics. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about. You ready? For all of those who are 70s people. You'll know it. On a dark desert highway, cool wind in my hair, warm smell of colitis, rising up to the air. Up ahead in the distance, I saw a shimmering light. My head grew heavy and my sight grew dim. I had to stop for the night. Welcome to the Hotel California. Oh, such a lovely place. Such a lovely face. They're living it up. They're living it up at the Hotel California. What a nice surprise. Bring her alibis. There's mirrors on the ceiling. They'll give you pink champagne on ice. But she said we're all just prisoners here of our own device. And it ends, last thing I remember, I was running for the door. I had to find a passage back to the place I was before. Relax, relax, said the night man. We're programmed to receive. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. This describes the trap of money, success, fleshly pleasure, worldly satisfaction, and when it catches you and bites you, some of you can never leave, and you haven't left yet. I've seen it. Homer writes about this in his Odyssey. It's called the Lotus Eaters. I sent 2 of my company to see what manner of men the people of the island might be. There they found the Lotus Eaters. They were pleasant men, and they did no hurt to my men, but they gave them to eat of the lotus flower. It was so delicious that those who ate of it no longer cared about their duties nor about their home and did not even want to go back and say what happened to them. They only just wanted to stay and munch lotus with the lotus eaters without thinking further of their return. Nevertheless, I grabbed them, I made them return, but they wept bitterly, but I forced them back to the ships and I made them fast under the benches. Then I told the rest of the crew, get on board at once, because I don't want you to eat that lotus, because once you eat the lotus, you won't want to go home. So if this is true, what if? If it's true that when we're caught in a bout of amnesia, trials are the best thing for us, I got to thinking. This is when it gets dangerous to be a pastor, because logical inferences will take you into places where people won't like you. So when you ask what if, it's a dangerous business. So we're going to enter right now into places few people go. But we must consider 2 what ifs. What if riches and wealth are Satan's greatest tool to keep us from following Jesus? Well, number 1, that means some of the most famous preachers in the United States are nothing but con artists. You know, these health and wealth guys? They're liars. What good is God's blessing? What good is God's blessing if it causes my heart to be more interested in obtaining riches than trusting in Jesus day to day? Paul talks about this in 1 Timothy 6, 9 through 10 and 17 to 18. You don't have to turn there, but says, the love of money has caused a lot of people to abandon their faith. That's the point. If I run the logic of this, even taking it a step further, more practically, this means that a person who has a lot of things and is fond of their things, it might be a sign that God is not blessing them, but rather giving them over to what they want. Maybe winning Gus Macker tournaments every Sunday, or having a son or daughter be great at weekend sports like softball, baseball, basketball, is Satan's way to destroy a soul, especially if it keeps them out of normal church life. Maybe that person's always busy on the boat, camping on the weekends, keeping up the repairs at the cabin, has been seduced by the dark angel because it's a great way to forget more than to worship. Lotus flowers taste great, but their side effects are deadly. What if God held back blessing to make you seek Him? Wouldn't that be the truest sign of God's love for you? No, because it includes pain. I hate pain. I hate pain. But Paul says that future glory is not going to be worth even comparing to the tiny little bit of pain we have now. Future glory is going to be worth it. So my son, who is really a great football player, and he's used to gridiron glory, he decided to work at a Christian camp this summer in Branson, Missouri. He was a camp counselor to 10 and 11-year-old boys. He had to serve these rotten kids 24/7, bringing them their meals, teaching them how to do early morning devotions, watching them swim, and tucking them into bed at night. Why would a football star do this? One day he called me and he said, "Dad, 3 kids got saved this week in my cabin." So I said, "How could this matter more than scoring touchdowns? Why did you decide to do this summer before your senior football season? You wasted your summer." I didn't say that. But often we act like that, don't we? What a waste to do things for God. The takeaway point of asking what if is this. After meditating on Deuteronomy 8, I'm convinced God can't really get a hold of a heart until that heart sees its need. Once it sees its need, then it's open for grace and mercy. And once you taste real grace and mercy, it produces gratitude, because it is only grace and mercy that produces genuine gratitude. I call it the satisfaction conundrum. You got a satisfaction over here, trial, and then you got a satisfaction on the other side of trial. The satisfaction before trial often is blinding, lying, and it's like lotus flowers. Trials are difficult. They're difficult. But the satisfaction on the other side of trial, when you reach out to God and He comes in grace and mercy, it changes your life. Peter the apostle was fishing all day, all day, all day. Didn't catch a thing. Jesus said, "Why don't you go out again and throw your nets out?" Try it one more time. "Lord, I've been fishing all day. Just trust me. Trust me." So Peter reluctantly obeyed what God said, threw his net out, and caught a fish that overwhelmed the boat. He looked at Jesus and he said, "Be done with me, because I'm a sinful man." He was changed from that moment on. It says in Romans, go to Romans 11:32. This verse says it all. Romans 11:32. We'll end on this verse. It says, "For God has bound everyone over to disobedience." That means a life of pain, struggle, trials, brokenness, failure. Why? So that He may have mercy on them all. Because when you taste His mercy, you're changed. Sad part is we don't want mercy. We just want to be satisfied. But I'm telling you, His mercy is the most satisfying thing. Have you ever tasted it? And when you're going through a trial, have you ever reached out for it? Because as it says in Hebrews, come boldly to the throne of grace to find mercy and grace in your time of need.